Welcome into this Five Clubs conversation. I'm Gary Williams, the golf analyst. When you consider all the people who talk about the game, who analyze the game, they played the game. All of them played it at a very high level, some at the absolute highest levels. Major championship winners, members of Ryder Cups and President's Cups. The guy who's going to join me, he didn't win a major, but he contended in majors. He has been an essential voice analyzing the game for decades. He did it for years on Live From, battling on a nightly basis in some of the best debates, thoughtful conversations that we've seen about the game of golf. And most recently, over the last 5 to 7 years on CBS, doing live golf. I'm talking about Frank Nobilo. Frank's life in the game, his career being cut short by injury, his anger, somewhat bitter about that ending in the manner that it did, and doing the television that he's done. He's a thoughtful guy. His thoughts on golf and lots of other stuff coming up right now.
Think this is only a grip?
It's only my sole connection to this.
It's only in my hands on every single shot.
It's an extra 2 yards of carry when it matters most.
Yeah, only a grip.
Mine are only golf ride.
Respect the grip.
And with that, we welcome in, look at the affable Frank Nobilo. How are you, my friend?
Gary, I can't believe it. Yeah, no, great. Thanks. Yourself?
Doing very well. You know, we're getting close to the holidays. How are you at the holidays? Are you cheery?
Well, you know me too well. No, I'm never cheery. Ask my wife. She thinks I'm the most miserable person in the world. No, I love it. I think the end of a long year, you know, you look forward to it. I actually get the lawnmower out. I start cutting the grass. I like to get outside. We have a dog now. His name's Bison, world's smallest bison. We're always cat people. And it's fun. I love being at home. I really do.
Okay, now, what you just said, you've just said something so earth-shattering, because I had a knockdown, drag-out discussion with you
Yes.
in a production trailer years ago about dogs and cats.
Yes, I know.
And you got, and you would apt on occasion to get a little defensive about things. And I said, why are you a cat person? And you said, why are you a damn dog person?
Yep.
And you said flat out, I'm not picking up that shit. Well, look at you. Now you are.
Gary, have you ever heard of that expression that people change?
Yes. This is maybe the most evolution that's ever happened to you. You've evolved in a way that I didn't think was achievable.
I'm actually blaming my cats now. Sadly, we had to put one away last year, but you know, cats are always precocious, and in the morning they wake up in an angry mood, pretty much like me, right? And Bison, who's the world's smallest bison, every single day he wakes up in a great mood, and I didn't think that was possible. So, Gary, after all these years, I admit you were right.
Well, I love that. Now, what's the breed?
It's called a Cavapoo. During COVID, Selena, my wife, her niece, who was a model, she stayed with us for a little while. And sadly, she had a dog, and we had two cats at that particular stage. So we had to try and integrate one dog with two cats, and I was furious. But then time changes everybody. And within a couple of months, Humphrey, who was also a Cavapoo, was my TV buddy. And then one of the saddest days is when she took him back to California after COVID. But that's really what changed. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to get to present day, but I want to go back with you because, lives in any sport, in any endeavor, everybody's got a story. And I think your story is particularly interesting. When you were young and your parents were going through a divorce, golf was I'm not, these are not your words. I don't know if it was a respite, a salvation, a release, an escape, whatever it happened to be. Why golf?
It's a great question. As a matter of fact, I was just in New Zealand before I went to the Asia Pacific Amateur. It was my mother's 87th birthday. And we sort of actually revisited that. I think a lot of people out there can identify. I was, I was like 14, 15 when my parents were having trouble. I'd started playing golf when I was 13. I played a lot of other sports. So I think when you come into a household and there is a lot of uncertainty, with the family structure, you feel lost. You blame yourself sometimes. Have I been naughty? Have I misbehaved? Am I the reason? So the beauty of golf, especially over every other sport, is normally you get to play with older people, adults. So on a Saturday morning, some of the members at my local club would pick me up and they would drive me to the golf course. So not only did I get to hit golf balls, but I also interacted with other people. They're much older, much wiser. And I realized the world wasn't such an evil place. My parents subsequently divorced. And the one constant that stayed with me was golf. So with that, I developed friendships. I developed a different way of looking at life. I didn't blame myself for what happened to my parents. I also subsequently went through a divorce, as you know. So I realized that, we are very human. My dad passed away a couple of years in the middle of COVID. I couldn't go to the funeral because of that. And when I was in New Zealand, I did visit his grave. And it's weird how all of those sort of 40 odd years starts to replay. But it was tough at the time, but it changed me as a person, and golf through my whole life. Every time something good or bad happened, it was involved in golf. When I could no longer play through rheumatoid arthritis, I felt cheated. I felt like the game had sort of deserted me. And then lo and behold, just down the road, when I got to meet you, that Golf Channel was there. And so for some miraculous reason, golf always gave me a better next day.
So Frank, it was more the connection with other people, particularly adults. Is it like you love tennis, and you love tennis as a kid, but tennis doesn't give you connection. You stand on the other side of something. There's nothing communal about it. There's no real fellowship. Golf, there's fellowship. Was it that more so than the discipline itself?
It's interesting there because the analogies that I would say, tennis was my first love in an individual sport. Both endeavors are very selfish. You're absolutely right. On one, you're on the other side of the net. The other one, you have the communal rule book. So we both police ourselves during the course of a round of golf. But I thrived on the competition. So I guess going back to when my parents split up, you fight. I think you have to, like anybody in a tough situation, you dig your heels in and you fight. So I really enjoyed the competitive aspect, whether it was tennis or golf. But I also love the technical aspect because tennis is a very technical game, as is golf. So I love the stroke in tennis the same way I to this day, I love the golf swing. The nuances of it, just being down at Royal Melbourne, seeing these young players play and just admiring, they have club head speed that's elite. That's, the PGA Tour averaged 171 miles an hour ball speed. And these guys are, just tipping close to 180 mile an hour ball speed. They're ready. They're good enough. And, it makes you think back they just want to compete. They want to play. So for me, I love the competition, but you're right. I love the fact that golf had this thing called a rule book, which I still respect today. And you get out there, you can play the same golf course, whether it's in a group at a different time, in a major championship, in a club championship, you name it. And you get to sign your name at the end of the day for your work. It's important.
I played competitive junior tennis, and I was okay with confrontation. Golf, it's not inclined to be that way unless you're in a match play situation, which you're going to play some as a kid. Were you comfortable with confrontation when you were young?
You know me too well. Yeah, I did. I was 6 foot when I was 16, so I never grew an inch after that. But So when I played other sports like rugby league, which is, a religion in New Zealand, New Zealand just lost the Rugby World Cup. I'll say it before you do. And of course it was to South Africa. So, you learn early on. I mean, you took your knocks. And yeah, I think coming from a Slavic family that had immigrated basically to New Zealand, yeah, it was. You were treated differently. So you learn to not physically fight all the time. You just learn to fight for your position in life. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And for me, golf, I enjoyed the fight. I enjoyed whether it's trying to salvage a round of 75 and somehow turn it into 74. An old Australian coach by the name of Alex Mercer, who taught Steve Alkington, had that. He said, it's so, if you really want to be good at this game, learn to turn a 75 into a 73. And I'm like, oh, that seems weird.
Yeah.
But that's the key.
You mentioned Royal Melbourne, and I know that it was, I love hearing about these seminal moments in golfers' lives when they see what is going to be required of them, and they never forget it. And I know that you have said that when you went to Australia, in particular the Sandbelt, when you were a late teen, that you're like, Jesus, okay, this is as good as it gets. Like, I have to get a lot better if I think I can do this as a vocation. And you turned pro at 19. Was that the place where you said, okay, I think I can do it, I want to do it? What was it more? Was it more, I think I can do it, or I want to do it?
To be honest, it wasn't either of that. Because of my parents' situation, I couldn't afford to stay an amateur player.
Okay.
Oddly enough, when I worked on the Champions Tour early on in my golf career, I ran into John Mahaffey, who's still a friend today. And the same thing happened with Mahaffey. Mahaffey couldn't afford to remain an amateur. So you take the plunge, and I think that's where naivety comes into play. You don't think that there's this big open world that you might struggle and it's going to cost a lot of money. You just say, hey, golf, how hard can it be? I'll go and play. But to your question on Royal Melbourne, yeah, that was the first litmus test, because it's a little bit like stats today. A lot of the shot link stats we see are on American golf courses. And they're right. I was texting with Lou Stagner yesterday, who's brilliant at that, and I use a lot of his stuff sometimes. But to me, it's very much American golf courses. They're 25, 30 yards wide. There's rough. There's actually bunkers in rough, which I hate. And there's greens that are fairly receptive. They all run around 12 on the stimp meter. So you can really nail it down to closer to the green is better, and likewise. But then when you go to a place like an Open Championship or Ireland, and you play a links type golf course, or you go to a sandbelt golf course like Royal Melbourne, Kingston Heath, Commonwealth, Metropolitan area, there's so many of them there. It's different. You realize how precise you have to be. And actually 20 feet left of the flag is actually a really good shot. And actually angles do count on those golf courses, just because of the firmness, the way in which the bunkers are cut in. But we don't have stats for those golf courses. So we exist in this shot link era, which is very much a wooded golf course that plays very linearly. But to your question, yeah, so when I first went to Royal Melbourne, I didn't realize how good you had to be to play courses like that. I'd played shorter golf courses, and I'm like, wow, and you start to see players like Ballesteros. I remember that's the first golf course I ever saw him at, hitting a bunker shot on in those days, what was the 13th hole on the composite golf course. And I'd never seen a bunker shot be hit so beautifully. And you saw guys like Greg Norman, the way in which they drove the ball, the Graham Marshes, the world, David Graham, Nicholas, Johnny Millers, and you're like, wow, this is good. So my sandbed experience was not just the golf courses, but the players that I saw playing them.
The European Tour qualifying school, the PGA Tour is going to have, they're bringing back what used to exist, and I found it to be very provocative television. I don't want to call it entertainment because it's excruciating. That week for you was a key week, that experience, because people that you had kinships with suddenly became real bona fide adversaries. Take me back to the European Tour qualifying experience and how cutthroat and how much friction existed for a week like that with livelihoods on the line.
Wow, I'd nearly forgotten about that. I had a good friend. His name was Mike Harwood. He was runner-up to Ian Baker Finch in the 1991 Open Championship. Also won Volvo Masters, British PGA. Was a heck of a player, but he was a little older than me. You know, we were starting up, and he happened to be my roommate. And you know, you start the week thinking, well, you know, hey, I can't even remember if it's 50 cards or 25, to be honest, at that particular time. But we thought we were pretty good players. We'd played well in Europe, just in a couple of events, the odd one that we played in. I'd played some state opens in America on my way across. I'd played all right in Australasia for a few years. So you just think the natural step. Well, I think we were playing cards at night. Like, you know, it's like Snap, right? I mean, how angry can you get at Snap? And we nearly came to blows. And it was purely just the week trying to catch up to you, that you realize that perhaps one or neither actually might get their European Tour card. And all the bad emotions, it's not that you were jealous for a friend, you were just jealous that it might not be you. And then you thought all the things, you know, are you good enough? Maybe I'll get a bad bounce. You look at all the other names there, and you realize for the first time in your golfing career, it really is a divisive mark that you are either going to make it or your career is going to be radically different, and you don't know how long it's going to be stonewalled for. So yeah, by the end of the week, it was, you didn't even talk to your best friends. It was bizarre. It's probably the worst experience I've had as a human being from a kinship point of view. But it was a real growing up. Fortunately, we both got through. And then Sunday night, it was a relief. I remember we were going out for dinner, and we had a drink, and it was like the week didn't happen, but we both know it did.
When you start to ascend in Europe and you're being productive and you're getting results, where was America on your horizon? Where was the United States and the PGA Tour in your worldview of where you wanted to be 3 years, 5 years, whatever? What was America to you then?
It was the Holy Grail, but I'd had I played the Eisenhower Trophy in 1978, and Jay Siegel was a member of that team. And I remember him saying, you know, do you want to go to college in America? And at that stage, not a single New Zealand player had gone to college. So for me, New Zealand only had 3 million people in those days. So it just seemed like, well, no one else has done it. There's no way. You know, America was out of the question. So I think if you talk to the Nick Prices of the world, the Greg Normans, David Graham, that generation of player, it was the last step. And everybody made the same sort of route. South African players went to Europe. And Nick Price would say, if you can win, you know, 5 times in Europe, you only had to win double in America. You know, that's the way he thought of endorsement money. When you were that good, you know, Europe always looked after Europeans. He thought that America was fairer for non-American players. But you were never going to be treated the same as an American player, but you'd be treated better than a foreign player in Europe. But it was always the last step. So we just simply followed everybody else's route that had gone that way. You know, Australasia, you went to Asia. That's where I first met Payne Stewart. Actually, I remember the Malaysian Open. That's where he met Tracy, actually. A lot of players, you'd see them in Asia. They would go back to America, and we would go on our way to Europe and sometimes Japan. But for me, it was always on the horizon, but it was always like, are you good enough? Are you really good enough? Because that's the final step. So yeah, but it was always the carrot.
The 1994 U.S. Open, I grew up loving the U.S. Open. I thought guys in blue blazers with bucket hats. I thought P.J. Boatwright was a rock star. I mean, what a golf nerd I am. But back then, people you were unfamiliar with, you really were unfamiliar with them. Golf Channel was born in 95. We didn't have the proliferation of television, the Korn Ferry Tour, and watching the European Tour and the oddball event from Asia. So there were a lot of people who did not know you in 1994 when you pop up. And it's romantic. It's like, look at this guy. What a story. And you know, as a television guy, whether it's Tommy Roy or Lance Barrow or Seller Shy, like, find out what this guy's story is, because we're going to tell this story on television. What was the story like for you that week as you wouldn't go away and you found yourself with a late time on a Sunday? What was that week like?
It was tough. I was, for one of the reasons really that I guess, you might as well tell the truth. I mean, I was going through a divorce. It was very, very hard. I was making a career change. The European Tour had fought very hard, and they'd finally, for the very, very first time, got the USGA to accept the top 15 of the European money list. That was the very, very first year. So Ken Schofield, who good friend of mine as well, Ken had fought very, very hard for that. And so it was like he wanted us to go. He says, finally, we've got this exemption. Up until then, it was only the top money winner. Like, for example, players like Felder, you'd be surprised how few US Opens he played in prior to winning his first Masters. So you were denied playing these championships. So it was a big deal. So I went over there, and I remember sort of staying in the hotel. I loved the golf course. I just loved how hard it was. And I just thought, hey, I'm playing a US Open. I was playing some pretty good golf in Europe. I'd won a few tournaments. And I'm like, let's just play. And then lo and behold, on Sunday, I remember making like a 25-footer on Saturday, and I get drawn with Ernie, who was one of my good mates, in the final round, in the last group. So that part was a little surreal. But, the interesting thing was, even though I think I'm 10 years older than Ernie, I wasn't ready to win a US Open mentally, but he was. For him, it was like, why wouldn't I? So, I think I shot my 75 or something like that on Sunday, but it was great. And then people picked up on the story when I'd won in Sweden, I think for the first time in Europe. Pirate Ancestry came up, and, I did a stupid magazine thing, and I put an eye patch on in Europe. And so someone with a little investigative, journal,
sure,
research found that, repurposed that, and I don't know. It was a good story, and I dined out on it for a little while, but it was fun, and it was the start of getting into the Masters and some other things, and it was another kickstart in my career. But yeah, 95 US Open was huge in my career.
The you said that Ernie was ready and you weren't. You embraced the grind. You liked the hardest golf courses. You thought that suited you, but you didn't particularly have a big ego about yourself as a player. You looked at other guys and you're like, God, you really see yourself as being like you. I've heard you say, I didn't see myself that way. I had to take on the golf course, embrace the grind. Why do you think you didn't have a big ego?
Probably have a bigger ego now. Just your upbringing, coming from New Zealand, it's a syndrome called the tall poppy syndrome. If you thought you were good, you were cut down to size. And I remember going to Metropolitan Golf Course in Melbourne for a big tournament. It's called the Victorian Open. A lot of people played there. And I went to go on the range. And in those days, you had your shag bag and your caddy picked up your golf balls. So I'm about to go on the range, and there's Greg Norman, Lee Trevino, Ballesteros, David Graham, Jack Newton when he was a hell of a player. There's a couple other players, but I put it down. I started hitting, and I could hear like gunshots coming out of my left ear from the shots that they were hitting. I called my caddy, and I just picked my shag bag up, and I went to the putting green. I'm like, this is weird. And I remember same thing going to the Open Championship for the first time in Troon. Tom Weiskopf, who sadly passed away, was an idol of mine. And I'd seen him in Adelaide in one of the tournaments and got to meet him, and it was great. He never ever disappointed me as a man or as a friend. And I remember going to the range. It was the same thing. You go there, and they're the who's who. You remember in New Zealand, we only got a couple of tournaments a year. So
right.
These people, they were on your screen. They were stars. And when you picked up a golf magazine, which normally came like a month or two late, their pictures were on those magazines. They were stars. So for me, just like any other kid, I was overawed with the other. When you play like in a US Open and you see Jack Nicklaus is playing in the same tournament. I remember playing in I can't remember the name of the tournament, but there was an Australian player called Ted Ball, and same thing, you're playing all right, and I see Jack Newton, Bob Shearer, Stuart Ginn, Greg Norman, David Graham. I see all these names on the leaderboard. And remember this Ted Ball, who I was playing with, he goes, "What's wrong, son?" I'm like, I ain't ever going to beat them. And he goes, and I was 19, and he goes, "What do you think they thought?" and they were 19. Exactly the same thing. And it's one of the nicest things, you remember things like that.
Sure.
Billy Dunk, who was another player that was great to me, South African player, John Bland. There's so many people that help you on the way, that help you believe a little bit more in yourself. So yeah, it's a growing process.
The 96 U.S. Open, so you were in the cauldron in 94, 96 at Oakland Hills. You got a real chance on the inward nine and a couple holes. I think you had a 3-putt. I don't know if it was 13, 14. You made a double. Maybe right after that, you were still seething, possibly. But you shared that you and Monty flew on I think on a private plane that night. Was that the first time you were really gutted? I mean, gutted because you thought, son of a bitch, I could have won this.
Well, I probably used some words that are a little worse than that. But yeah, no, that's I actually had a chance in 95 at Shinnecock. I played with Davis Love, who missed a 2-footer on 16. And I think we both finished 8th. So, I played 2 US Opens and I'd finished in the top 10 in both. I'm like, hey, this is maybe this suits me. I'm a straight hitter and this works. So I'd finished 4th at Augusta that year. That was the Norman Felder year.
Well, you had the third lowest scoring average, I think, in the majors that year behind those two, right?
Correct. Yeah, they were the only two. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, thank you.
Well, just to feed this large ego that you have now.
No, thank you. But when I got to Oakland Hills, same thing. I liked the golf course, and I remember playing with John Morse actually, who on Sunday who had a really good chance to win. But yeah, I remember hitting a 3-iron into, I'm going to say 14 or 15, and I'd either tied for the lead or I was one back. It might have been tied. So you got a handful of holes left. And maybe not even that. And I remember having a run at the putt. I had a beautiful 3-iron, and I ran it past, missed it coming back. And the very next hole is the dogleg left par 4. And I mean, it's the dumbest decision I've ever done in my life. I'm angry. And I took driver and tried to hit it over the corner, clashed around, made double, and then sort of limped my way in. And you're right. At the end, Monty was a few groups ahead. We had the same agent and Guy Kinnings. Monty is the world's worst flyer. He used to buy 2 first-class seats, one for himself and his wife. And in those days, you could sit in the jump seat by the pilot. And he would just go, as soon as the plane took off, he would go to the jump seat. And then about half an hour, he'd come back and say, we're not going to die. The pilot's got kids. And I'm like, it was the dumbest thing in the world. So Monty's already nervous. And we're about to go to the thing. And I'm answering, questions on like, you joked. Why did you, what happened? And, the media had been very nice to me in America. So you owe them the time to at least answer. So I'm stuck there. Monty's sort of yelling at my wife. I'm like, where is he? We've got to go to the airport, blah, 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 blah. And then finally I get in the car. And now I'm fuming because Monty's pressuring. And we had a private flight to go from there to New York. And then we were catching a flight back to London. And I remember we got lost and we stopped at a gas station. And I went up to Monty and I nearly grabbed him by the throat. And I said, Monty, if you don't apologize to my wife, I will kill you. And Monty was fine. And we calmed down. Guy Kinnings was driving him. And we got to the airport. And then Monty was Monty. Monty's very misinterpreted. He was actually a fun guy to play with. But within a flight, on a flight, close to a flight, you never wanted to be near him. World's worst flyer ever.
Maybe that's the reason why when he started playing on the Champions Tour, Frank, he was driving everywhere, and I thought it was delightful. Like Monty Takes America, the guy who was, lampooned and vilified for all those years, like he's now being embraced, and he's driving around, and he's stopping at all these, bedroom communities all over him. You think that's part of the reason?
Oh, it is. That's what I mean. It was so misinterpreted because, the Mrs. Doubtfire nicknames and all that. And Monty wanted a perfect world. Everybody thought that Monty complained like people would, I don't know, click a pen or, it was pre-cell phone days and all that. But he had the same standard when you were hitting the ball. So if you were playing alongside, he expected people to be quiet for you as well. So it wasn't just a selfish endeavor. And he's actually bloody funny, to be honest. I mean, if you got Monty when he was sort of puffing his stuff up there and getting annoyed, and his very first tournament, we were playing in Italy. Richard Boxall, who's an announcer now, and Boxy's playing really good. It's a Sunday. Monty's been a pro for two seconds basically, and Richard, is making a ton of birdies, and all of a sudden he's getting pretty close to the lead. It's going to be a big check, a lot of money, and he makes like triple. And I remember he's got about 4 holes to go, and Monty goes, "Richard, you got to take it with a pinch of salt." And Boxy is absolutely fuming. So Monty's actually doing all right, and like Monty makes like double up 18, which costs him a lot of money. And Boxy goes, "Monty, pinch of salt." So, hey, you give it, you take it. But they were the good old days. Yeah.
So here you are, you're throwing punches in the biggest events against the best players, and then you get diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis in 1997. What was the diagnosis intellectually, emotionally for you? Was it very hard to process, impossible to process? What was that time period like?
Yeah, it's happened at Honda. I remember playing Honda and I couldn't get my watch on. So I went to the fitness trailer and they're like, my wrists had blown up. I'm like, that doesn't look good. And I'm like, 36, 37 years of age, you're 10 foot tall, bulletproof. You should go and see a doctor said, I think you should see someone, a little bit, better than myself. So I was with IMG. IMG got me into the Mayo in Rochester, and I spent 3 days there. And then, you're still thinking like it's going to be, I don't know, swelling. I must have banged it or whatever. And then, you sit on a chair, and Dr. Ian Hay, who is a Scotsman, very keen golfer, sits you down and goes, you've got inflammatory polyarthritis, both wrists, elbows, and shoulders. And I'm like, you play golf with your arms. And I'm like, that doesn't sound very good. He goes, well, it's not. So I remember being prescribed 3 drugs: prednisone, Plaquenil. Plaquenil's like a mild form of chemotherapy, and Emuran. Emuran's an autoimmune suppressant. So if I got a cold, I finished up having to go to hospital. And it was with what they knew then, it's probably, I don't know, maybe it's a little over dramatic, but it felt like a death sentence for a golfer, really. And I kept trying to play for a few more years. And a couple of things happened that year. They changed the rule on the PGA Tour because I should have got Rookie of the Year. I broke the money record for a rookie. And they said because I played more than, I don't know, they made a number of 10 events that I couldn't be eligible for Rookie of the Year. So I'll always remember Stuart Sink's rookie year was 1997 because Stuart Sink got Rookie of the Year in 1997. But so by the end of the year, I'm like, what do you do? And then you start taking medication, and then it's got side effects, ligament and tendon. It's a steroid, prednisone. You a heavy dose of it, you start blowing up, you start putting on weight, you feel like crap, and you get worse and worse. And then basically I started doing more and more research, spoke to different type of doctors, and the question really was, if you're going to keep playing golf, you're going to keep doing this is probably going to kill you in the end. I mean, the damage it's going to do to your liver and all that, or stop playing golf and maybe taper off the medicine. So I chose the latter.
Frank, years ago, I did the Carolina Panthers broadcasting responsibilities for a couple years, and there was a guy, good player. He was a defensive back. His name was Mike Minter, and he had to retire early as he was bone on bone with his knees. And Jake Delhomme, who was the quarterback at the time, was sitting in the back of the room when they did this retirement announcement, and I was watching Jake just not even blink, listening to Mike Minter. And I asked Jake afterwards, I said, you seemed particularly locked in. And he said, yeah, I think it's important to always remind yourself that your own athletic mortality can be facing you any moment. And I don't say this morbidly. I've always found it fascinating because golf, you can play longer, but most of these pursuits, it's over, early 30s. Gosh, NFL players 28, 27, facing the mortality of something you dreamed about doing. You were doing it exceptionally well. Did you get beyond it a year later, 5 years later, still living to some degree with something taken from you?
I'm probably not the person to answer that. My wife, my daughter would probably give you a truer answer. I'm going to say 5, 6 years later, I was not okay with it, but I kept trying to play for a few years. And I guess I got lucky because of TV, to be honest, because in the end, TV was, in a roundabout way to answer the question, TV was like, when I was a kid, it was a team sport, right? That's what TV is. TV is a team sport. And Vince Scully, the great Vince Scully, said, like golf's one of the hardest ones because you have to pass the baton around. And then I realized that all the anger that I'd built up, all my contemporaries were doing. I've known Vijay Singh for, I don't know, 40 years. So to see a guy, people talk about some of the things in his life. If you've gone to Fiji, the chances of someone coming from Fiji being a great player they're non-existent. So to see him get to world number one and be the winningest player over the age of 40 was incredible. Ernie Els, 4-time major champion. Monty, how good he was. I mean, the list goes on. I don't want to really miss anybody out, but my contemporaries were still playing. And actually, I remember Ernie was annoyed at me because he was like, "You're quitting," and I'm like, "Dude, I don't have a choice. I don't want to do this voluntarily." So, I felt anger. All the people that I'd finally got to know and I'd finally started to believe myself as a player, that had stopped. And then when I started doing TV, and I didn't want to do TV, as you know, we talked about that. I didn't want to do it. But then my wife goes, like, have you ever looked around the world? Like, you think you're hard done by? And I did. And there I am, like, out of all the places in the world to live in, right there in there, Orlando, and there's a fledgling network starts up that's going to give you a chance where you could make some mistakes in that. So when I started to change the perspective, I realized golf was still giving me everything in my life. It had got me through my parents' divorce. It had got me into a career, and it was giving me another chance. So I actually really was pretty damn lucky.
The television thing, you mentioned the team sport. You always say things that I go, God, he always says the appropriate thing. You had a teammate who was a new teammate, Mark Rolfing, and he showed an affection and an inclusion for you, encouraging you early on. You think, God, this is uncomfortable. Maybe it's clumsy. I'm not talking enough. Maybe I'm talking. It's weird. It's a weird thing. It's, all the things, the dexterity you had as a golfer, you got to rely on a different aptitude. When did you feel comfortable speaking, being seen, talking about the game? Did it take 6 months, a year?
Never, to be honest. I don't.
Oh,
think,
come on, Frank.
No. I feel more comfortable, but every show, even now, I get anxious before I do a show.
But that's excitement, isn't it? Not nervousness, not
correct.
Yeah.
Just like when I played, I always thought that, when you're about to tee off, even half an hour before that, like, what's the day going to bring? TV is just like that. If you want to just lay it up and go there and go, here we go. But like, it's just down there, Asia Pacific Amateur Championship, right? There's 120 players. You have zero chance of learning all those players in a week. And there you are, and it's their day or their week. And you have an obligation to get it right. And you just know you could stay up all night. You're not going to be able to prepare well enough. So you're like, God, I got to do how good can I do it? So I got more comfortable speaking, obviously, in front of the camera. I always wanted to do live golf though, because I guess that was almost like fulfilling the bit that missed out. And the very first event I ever did, which was in Hawaii, Keith Hirschland was the producer. I sat next to Mark Rolfing, and also the host was Jim Kelly. And there's little things that nobody tells you. And I prepared for the broadcast like I would for a golf tournament. I went out and looked at the golf course, but no one had sort of told me that we look at holes in reverse. You look at them back down the fairway. So I almost felt dyslexic. Do I say the bunker's on the right, or do I say the bunker's on the left? Because it's on the right the way I'm looking at it, but it's on the left for the player. And so I would sort of stop and go and not know what to say. And I remember Jim Kelly taking me out for dinner that night, and I sort of half quit after about 45 minutes because I thought this isn't going to work out. And he goes, "Why did you quit?" And I'm like, "Well," and I'd never really quit on anything. And I said I didn't quit. So we had a couple of drinks, and he asked me the question again. I said, "Well, it's stupid. It's all, it's all back to front." And so he got out of me the issues that I was having. And to this day, I still get texts from Jim Kelly, and just every now and again on something small like, "How big's the trophy? Who made it?" Just like the little nuances that I think are important in golf, and or even smiling, believe it or not. The first time I ever did Augusta, I was so nervous sitting in. I'd taken over from a friend who sadly is not doing very well,
right?
Peter Osterhaus.
Yep.
And so there I was benefiting from someone else's melody, sitting in the thing. And I'm like, it's the quietest place of the golf course. I'm not Jim Nantz. I mean, I'm an analyst, and I'm in a sort of prosaic part of the golf course. And I remember getting a text, and you're not meant to have your phones at Augusta. We all know that. And it was one from Jim, and it just said "smile." And so yeah, you get more comfortable. You do, but I think you owe it to the viewer to continually try and get better and better and better.
The team stuff. Look, you were on a great team with Lerner, and you actually just work with Rich again, and you get to work with him periodically with the crossover with Golf Channel CBS. But that you and Brandel and Matt Haggerty and all the people with Rich is the ultimate elegant traffic cop. But you wanted to do live golf. You did, and you go to CBS, and the transition that's occurred there, not only from Lance to Sellers Shy now as the lead producer, but with you and Trevor replacing Nick, and Dottie obviously is firmly entrenched, and so is Ian, and Jim's a legend. But that's a fair amount of change over the last 5 years. How do you know you have chemistry as a team? Because you guys have it. You can hear it. You can feel it. As somebody who leans forward and watches golf the way that I do, and a lot of people do, how did you know that, what, this team's going to be good? And Colt, I didn't mention Colt Knows too. You have a great relationship with. You needle the shit out of each other. And that, I like that as a viewer. I want that. I want to know you guys like each other by taking shots at each other in an affectionate way. How do you know you have good chemistry as a team?
Great question. I think you experiment first and foremost. CBS they've been great to me. They really have. It's going to be sad to see Sean McManus step down last year, because I remember when I was contemplating making the move. You're on a phone call with Sean McManus, and at that early on in the piece, I didn't realize his dad was Jim McKay. And I was a kid, 1972, growing up and hearing this broadcaster talk about, sadly, what was a horrible event in sport. But this guy I thought was meant to be a sports broadcaster, and there he is handling something other than that. And oddly enough, it reminded me of one of the most proudest moments with CBS. And it's a sad way to bring it up, but the handling of Kobe Bryant.
Yes.
We hadn't worked together as a unit for a little while, and we're about to come on the air, and we're hearing this, this tragedy has happened. And hearing Jim, literally 30 seconds to show, because, we had a golf show planned out, but you have a superstar. And hearing all those people working to get the story right, it had to be right. It had to be right. Amanda Balionis did a great interview with Tiger Woods too. So I think when you start putting people in the right place, and there's a legacy there too, not just from Frank Chikunium and Lance Barrow, but Peter Costas. I learned from Peter Costas. I enjoyed working with Gary McCord too. Gary, I think has helped Colt, and I think it's the same thing. I'm much older than Colt, but there's an obligation. I love working with him. He's fun. He's dangerous, which is good. That's what you should be. But he's smart. He's good. And these are his contemporaries. So he's extremely current. And I just think, going back to your question about chemistry, I think chemistry happens when you allow people to get their best stuff out. Like Dottie's super prepared. You can lead to Dottie. I'm a hole announcer. That's my job now. I'm not an analyst. You can lead. I know I can lead to Dottie in 100 different ways. I know I can lead to Colt in a different way, or Mark Immelman. Trevor's now jumped into Nick. I really enjoyed working with Nick because it was weird. As a player, I didn't know him, and then it's amazing, these sort of ebbs and flows over the last few years. And I remember doing Greensboro just a couple of years ago, and there was Jim, Ian, myself, and Nick for his farewell, and that you can't make up. You just start working with people. We'd gone through COVID together. They developed the super booth idea, and it was going to stop. And then you realize that actually you're all part of people's lives. So, and I think that's where the chemistry develops. You allow it to happen. It's trust. It's giving people a chance to do their best stuff. It's listening. It's just, and it's reacting. And then before you know it, people go, hey, hopefully that's a good listen. But it's well led. Sellers has done an amazing job, I think, because golf's changed now. Televised golf, it's full of stats. It's different. You can't have the Ben Wrights of the world and the Longhursts. Everybody says they're great, and I still listen to some of the older stuff. But if you put it on now, people will go, they say it's great, but it's not what people want now. They want to know why that, you got to have launch monitor data. You got to have this, you got to have stats, you got to have that. Sport as a whole has changed. So therefore the announcer has to change too. So, but chemistry, yeah, that's the key. And I think, NBC had it too. Johnny, who I got to, I've been lucky to work with a lot of people. Peter Ellis was great to me. But Johnny and Gary and Rog, they were a great trio. And that's no disrespect to Mark Rolfing as well. They had golf's been lucky with some of the groups of people they've had calling the game.
I think you hit on, I think, the most important word, which was trust. And you were faced with something with the Kobe tragedy that was unorthodox. It was put in front of y'all. And it's situations like that to me are very revealing. And it reveals things. And there's a book that I'm a big believer in. It's called The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. And it's about that you don't look at obstacles, you just look at them as part of the journey and how you deal with them. And trust is a huge part of that. It's leaning on other people at times where the rundown is not the rundown anymore, Frank. We're not just calling golf and go to Amanda and she's got Tiger and all those things. I'm sure that was you look back on a day like that, as you pointed to, that was the beginning of something that is, I think, probably reinforced on a regular basis. You guys sound like you're having fun. You know what that does? That makes it more fun for the viewer. And you guys have a great team. I'm going to try to pack in as much as I can here in those next 15 minutes because it's important for people to hear your thoughts on this stuff. I know you're concerned about the game. About the separation between the recreational game and the professional game, that the Rubicon that now exists between what I look like hitting a shot and what the best players in the world, who are aliens to begin with, look like, the divide may be too wide. Is it too wide to be narrowed ever?
No, not if people do the right thing. You're right, it's massive. When I used to play in Pro-Ams, for example, every now and again, and I'm talking a wood, which makes me sound very archaic, but, an amateur would pop one past you and he'd puff his chest out and it was great. And you'd play into similar tees on a par 3, maybe go back one tee box. When I'm doing, some of my reconnaissance during a Pro-Am day, the amateur's at 160 yards and the pro goes back 230. 70-yard walk. So he's not even talking to his amateur partner. Like with all the things that were great about Pro-Ams, even the fact that they make 9-hole Pro-Ams now, it was a huge part of the sport. So we've sanitized it, and it's quite simple. It really is quite simple. The ball with the elite players goes too far. And it's the club as well. And they knew it was going to happen. To try and put it in a nutshell, I remember 2013 Muirfield. I'm walking the golf course and I run into Tim Clark. And Tim Clark putted with a long putter, anchored, right? And I was on the golf show, I was against the anchored puttering because I believe the putter should be the shortest club in the bag. I really do think it's a game of skill. Baseball, if you can't make it to first base, you're not allowed to play. As hard as that may seem, right? That's one of the rules. And I just thought putter shouldn't be anchored. So, I have a lot of respect for Tim Clark, and we're arguing straight, talking in the middle of fairway. And I'll never forget Tim's reply. He goes, he said, every single thing they've done in golf helps the long hitter. And Tim is not a long hitter.
Yep.
Right. Won a Players' Championship. And he said, finally, they do something that helps the normal player or someone like me, and they take it away. 3 years later, the anchor ban, January 1st, the anchor ban was done, right? But everything else was allowed to keep going. And I'll never forget that argument. And John Bodenhammer, you've already mentioned his name. There's a quote with the anchored putter, and he said, look, fast forward 50, 100 years, how do we want the game to look like? And I would say the same thing right now. It's not about taking fun away. I very rarely see a mid-iron hit in. One of the best holes I saw all year was the 18th hole Scottish Open, courtesy of a 30-mile head breeze. And Bob McIntyre hit 2 woods, made this amazing 4. I thought he was going to win. McIlroy birdies 17, 71st hole, and then hits 2 or 3 iron in and makes 3. And it was a great finish, but it took a 30-mile-an-hour wind into their face. It took unusual set of circumstances. We used to see that all the time, through previous generations. The Rory McIlroys, they want to hit those clubs. But it is, I think Dustin Johnson was asked, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years ago, what was the longest club he hit into a par 4 year? He said 6 iron. I mean, there's 14 clubs in the bag, so we're not utilizing that. And sadly, too, we can get into a debate on course architecture. And I know some people don't like it, and they'll go, it's old-fashioned or whatever. But golf is one of the advantages of our game is we don't have fixed parameters. So you got to take your game and play in all these different, like the sandbelt. And it's not designed for 350-yard tee shots and a flip wedge. You miss it all. And we got bunkers in the rough. Everybody goes, tighten the fairways, make it harder. But I mean, a bunker in a rough is like putting a tree, like an oak tree in the middle of your living room. It's you don't need it, right? I mean, a bunker in the rough, so you got to mow around it or not mow around it? It was crazy, right? Bunkers were designed so that the ball would roll into it, same as greenside bunkers. So we've allowed the parameters of the game to keep going and going and going and going and going and going. And here we are, not by accident. And also remember too, we are the only sport in the world where the player gets to choose their equipment. So yeah, I think we're at a watershed moment. I really do hope that people support the USGA and the R&A. They need all the help, but even just changing the driver from 48 to 46, I mean, people kicked and screamed. They really did. And it's just crazy. The COR of a driver, the driver is now the easiest club in the bag to hit. The driver was about skill. It was an advantage. It should always be an advantage to be a long straight hitter. You never want to take that away. But if you give everybody 30 yards, what's the point? Yeah,
Frank, I go back. I've always loved the total driving stat in 1980 when Nicklaus, the combined distance and accuracy of 23, 13th distance, 10th in accuracy. Nobody has been in the 20s since, and that was with obviously a small persimmon head, and he was 40 years old. That number is kind of like Bob Beamon. I mean, that will never be touched again. Let me ask you quickly about LIV. In 24 months, what is all of this? What do you think it'll look like?
Well, LIV is a divorce, right? It's a divorce, and there's nothing amicable. When you go 2 different ways, it's the best way to put it. And so all the acrimony has come out. If LIV never happened, would the people have gone talk so poorly of the PGA Tour? I think that we all know the answer to that. Does that mean that the PGA Tour is cookie cutter clean? No, I don't. We never get invited to the mandatory meeting to explain TV, for example, to the players. Players have no idea of the TV product, right? So there's lots of things I think that the PGA Tour can brush up on too. I was reading yesterday where Rory now wants like PIF to be part of the thing.
Yes.
My biggest concern, Aramco, for example, is the largest company in the world. It overtook Apple, I think, back in May. And if you watch Formula One, you see Aramco there, here, there, and everywhere. And Sky do a great job of doing that. It's shown on ESPN over here, and there's very few commercials. So I don't know. One pipe dream would be to embrace that money if you want to. Hopefully get an Aramco involved. That reduces the commercial load so people can have golf with less commercials. That actually would be a big way about it. But, I think there's also a realization, we don't rate high enough, as much as it pains me to say. Golfers are overpaid compared to every other sport. No one wants to admit that. They don't want to say it. If Liv never came along, we're going to have so many 20 million plus purses, and we don't have the ratings. Globally, and I've used this a bunch of times, volleyball worldwide rates higher than golf. I don't see volleyball players racing around in private planes and all sorts of things. So we're in a really weird space. So I would love to have an answer for 2024, but if Jay Monahan and his team stick with obviously the statement, which was September 11, and decide to go in a different direction, we're going to have a war. We really will, because you have money on one side, and I know Fenway is a very good group. They own Liverpool and all
Sure.
that, but you're inviting competition, and it's going to be like Coke and Pepsi.
Do you, in 5 years, what do you envision Phil Mickelson's role in the game is? Is that too challenging to answer right now? And that's a hard one. But I always go back to, forever's a long time, and contrition, the cleansing of people historically in sports who've been blights temporarily. There's a lot of them. Do you think that there will be at some point a reentry for him at a level that we always thought was going to be commensurate with who he was?
No. No is the easy answer.
Okay.
And it's sad because, I was at the CBS, we called the PGA Championship.
Yep.
Where he won. And I'm like, when you get to be part of I was at Zozo when Tiger got 82 wins.
Yep.
Phil winning that PGA Championship, it's a wow moment. And the way in which he did it, I'm like, dude, you have any, wing foot Johnny Miller riding off on a white stallion, all those things had been redeemed. Phil had a record that nobody else had, and that Tiger Woods isn't going to have. And I'm like, finally, you're complete in this generation. And so I look at that Phil as a contemporary as well. I played a lot against him, that I admired his skill, his ability. And then I see the statesman role, which is really what it is now. And it's very disastrous. So it's another one. It saddens me. The books that are written, obviously. So at the moment, we're only hearing the bad stuff about Phil. They're all true, to be honest. But I've suffered with Phil, whether it's a President's Cup on the other side and some of the things that I know how he can behave. But I also know that for our own foundation, for example, if we asked for a Masters flag to be signed by Phil and Amy used to send 2 back, not 1. So, that sadly, Phil is always going to be, there's duo personalities, and it's a shame. So, yeah, it's, I don't know. That's the tragic part about it right now, is that I don't think we can answer that question fairly until he hangs the clubs up.
Let me ask you very quickly about the whole Ryder Cup thing. I've referenced the book Legacy by James Kerr about the famous All Blacks. I know Luke Donald read the book. I know Paul McGinley has read that book. Frank, I'm of the belief that the European Ryder Cup team is one of the great sports franchises in the last 40 years. They're caretakers. There's humble obligation to being a part of the team. I'm not asking you to affirm that, but why do you think they're so good at doing what they do in a sport that's not inclined to be that way and only doing it once every 2 years?
I'm glad you mentioned the All Blacks there, because New Zealand now has 5 million people, and consistently rated as one of the best rugby teams in the world, regarded as the greatest rugby side for the last 120 years. And it's a borderline religion in there, the culture. So it's a culture, right? So when you put on an All Black jersey, you don't put on your jersey. You put on every other jersey that's been put on a man. And you get a number too. You're a number. Because if you're number 145 or whatever, it means there's 143 before you. So there's something to stand for. And when I first played in Europe, good friend Sam Torrance, for example, Sam made the winning putt with the arms up in the air. It's a phenomenal picture. And, to this day, if you speak to a Sam Torrance, for example, about a Ryder Cup, or a Seve, who was a great friend too in the days, on what it meant, it's, you almost started crying. And it's very, very similar to the way in which the All Blacks culture. And they did play for a tour because they always felt subservient. PGA Tour is everything, right? And just to go back to equipment, just for a bit to explain it too, when people talk about rolling the ball back, remember that's what Europe did. That's what the rest of the world did. The rest of the world used to use a small ball. One of the best things to happen in golf was when we standardized, and when the rest of the world started using the big ball, you got Greg Norman, Nick Price, Nick Faldo, Bernard Langer, Severin Ballesteros, all other ball. You got a growth in world golf. They got better. So that also fits into that time slot. So they were fighting for their tour. They were using an American golf ball, trying to beat America. It stood for a lot. And when you hear about their team meetings, it literally was like playing for a side. And it was more than who they were. And Ken Schofield was a big part of that, as is Tony Jacklin. When you hear Tony Jacklin talk about it, when he changed the system to make them, it's a little bit in a weird way. I remember just the same way I was brought up. You didn't think you were good enough. Tony had won 2 major championships. Says, we are good enough. And the biggest one is when Nick Faldo talks about it better than anyone, when they lost at Palm Beach by a point and Seve celebrated. And they're all thinking, we lost. Why are you celebrating? And Seve's words were, because they know we're good. And that's who they are. And that's a legacy. So they'll preserve the legacy. And it's hard. It's hard for America because they're so deep. It's hard. Europe has always had a nucleus. It had the big five for so long. And just like the All Blacks, for example, and you pass that along slowly. The turnover on the US team is always quicker. And I don't think the President's Cup helps them either. They have to play, every year.
Yeah, I think, what you said as well is that, look, they have a cause, like their tour. They know where they came from. And even though I think the PGA of America people, they're fine people, there's not a cause there. And you can say, well, they're playing for their flag. I get that. But there's a personal component that I think it's helpful. I think there's fuel there that they get from knowing how tangibly valuable the property is to the mere existence of the tour they're all a product of. And by the way, that Seve thing, that's 40 years ago. It's 40 years ago, almost, a couple months ago in Palm Beach. All right, let me get you out of here with these 5 quick questions. I don't know how much recreational golf you played. You had a job and you certainly were committed to your job. Is there a golf course you never played that you wish you had?
Yeah, Pine Valley.
You never played Pine Valley?
I never did. Turned it down, yeah. That Cypress Point is another one that I always thought I'd play it, but for some reason Pine Valley, it reminds me, I think, the pictures I've seen a little bit more like Sunningdale and also New Zealand. So I would have loved to have gone there. Frank,
you should go there. You should go there and have a meal and walk the golf course. It's a one of one.
Yeah, but I like to have unfinished business too. I think if you tick every box, what do you got left? So it's kind of nice having something to still look forward to.
No, I'm a huge believer in you got to have something to look forward to. All right, who is the most interesting person in golf that didn't or doesn't play for a living or write or talk about the game for a living?
Well, that doesn't play golf.
Doesn't play golf or write or be seen talking about golf. Could be a producer, could be a researcher, somebody in the industry of golf who you think is wildly interesting, who people don't know.
Well, we have a Rain Man called Josh Pick. And Josh, you were talking about chemistry. We've got an a text chain. And there's like 3 different text chains in amongst the CBS guys and all that. And Josh religiously goes through, whether it's Twitter, X, what do you want to call it, social media, you name it, SI, any golf article, you name it, it just fills your phone up to the point like, hey, this is the off season, pal. Religious. I met Colin Morikawa actually at Hartford through Josh Pick. He knows every caddy on tour. And he's literally Rain Man when it comes to that. So yeah, I would say Josh Pick. The world would say, who the hell's Josh Pick? Like I said, if I need to know like somebody's caddy, what they do, I remember once saying, "Oh, Colin Morikawa will hit a little draw just to this flag," and I got a text on my phone, literally on this show, Colin Morikawa doesn't hit draws, and you're like bang like that. So yeah, he knows his golf, and to be honest, I don't even know if Josh has ever played golf.
That's the answer. I didn't know he was the answer, but that's the answer. I know that you have a great affection for researchers in general because they live and die with it. All right. What are you better at now than you were 20 years ago?
Lying on the couch.
All right.
With my dog.
Oh, there you go. The last book or movie that made Frank Nobilo cry.
Well, yeah. Hey, I'm a chick flick guy. You can't embarrass me like that.
Rom-com?
Every Christmas, I'm going to watch Love Actually. I'm going to watch. This is a terrible one. If you ask my wife, she's going to say Bodyguard. I mean, I'm a sap when it comes to chick flicks. I mean, you've just blown my cover there, really. I mean,
so when you watch Bodyguard and they have that big crescendo scene where. And by the plane. Yes. Okay.
Well, I was a Whitney Houston fan. Yeah, I Will Always Love You. I mean, yeah, this song, if I hear it, you name it.
Okay. Last question. You can give one shot back to anybody in history to hit again.
Wow. Great question. It's too many, really, isn't it? So you got to.
There's a lot.
Hubert Green.
Hubert Green.
Yeah, at Augusta when he finished. Scott Hoke's close, to be honest, the 2-footer, but Hubert Green. Just to finish with a little story, I never really played with Hubert, but I ran into him, locker room, all sorts of things, and I was doing an event and down there, and it was at his golf course, and we're out with the crew, Golf Channel days, just sitting there, and Hubert and his wife were at the bar, and he came across and he said hi. It was great. I introduced him to all the people in the bar. It was all the people in our group, about 8 people, right? And he left. See you later, great. Might have saw him on the range or whatever it was. We went to get the bill, picked up by Hubert. He didn't know any of those people whatsoever, but yeah, he deserved that. He deserved the Masters, Hubert Green.
I thought maybe you'd go Monty second at Wingfoot in 06, your travel companion. But
no, I like Monty complaining the rest of his life. I really do. And I want that because he will dig his feet in and he will puff his chest, and that's the best Monty. So if Monty had that, that's why Monty still plays now, which is great. Yeah,
No, it's true.
No. You can't give Monty the whole cake and the candles.
No, that's true. But I will say his reaction to that strike is the most perfect. What is that? Was what he said.
He would hit that 8-iron. I think he had 8-iron in there. That's
right side of the fairway to a right pin.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't have made that shot for him in his career. And he could flat out play that guy. He could flat out play. That's the one shot he would want over. There's no doubt whatsoever. But like I said, a little bit of misery with Monty is perfect. It's especially at dinner time.
No, you're right about that. Listen, I value the time. I appreciate you, Frank. Thank you.
Hey, Gary, great catching up. Thanks, Mike.
Well, thank you again to Frank Nobilo. Frank is the real thing. He was a great player, and he's got chops, man. He's got chops as a person. He's got the bona fides in the game of golf. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Most importantly, thank you to all of you out there for watching and listening to this Five Clubs conversation.